Ladder of the Philosophy. It was called Rum. Author, Guglielmo Grattaroli. Published 1593. Referenced by Sir Isaac Newton. The Venerable Raymudas of July says, the intention of nature to create our mastery is that the stone is to be divided into 4 elements so that each of itself can be purified according to the requirements of nature. And that is the preparation of things which precedes the operation of the perfect preparation, and is properly called the separation of the elements, because it separates all the impure parts from the pure parts, and immediately prepared, by the benefit of the separation of the elements, otherwise the moisture would not love dry, nor the body spirit, if at first it had not been well washed away from their infections, with distillations and calcinations, solutions and coagulations. For by the separation of the elements, a salt of its burning sulfur is formed, which came to it through the original stain of our menstruation, which is the corruption of our stone. Therefore, the earth is calcined in the body after the extraction of the brass, so that it is very well purified from the sulfurs of salt and burns. Therefore, it is agreed that if the matter was not then corruptible by the corruption of the stone, it would never have to be cleaned. And since it is so necessary that, after the corruption of the stone, the composite may be purified from all its impurities after being separated from it by the 4 elements with distillation and calcination, before mercury is joined with the body to begin the real preparation, which is the creation of our stone. Therefore, it is necessary that the stone be divided into 4 elements with distillation and calcination. And this division is only so that the substance of the stone is strongly pure, and that the whole is pure mercury, which carries within itself the property of casting and fixing. Then when you want the body to dissolve after its calcining, dissolve it with live silver, by dragging it in pairs by the purified distillation. The blessing of the freezing spirit is fixed by the disintegration of nature, and of the body, and of that mixture with living silver. It can be effected only by putrefaction, by which the spirit is mixed in the body and with its elements, and it is that which renders the birds, as appears in their separations. Therefore digest, and putrefy the elements in their dung to an end, and this when it will be well digested to satisfy our will, that it may be able to separate well. But if you do not divide the stone, namely the 5th substance by the 4 elements, you may know that it cannot be united naturally, nor joined with a dry body pure substance. And it is agreed that those elements are well refined from their sections. And we say to you, that combustible and combustible sulfurs are separated by the benefit of calcining, and completely annihilated by fire and from the earth, and the body is crushed and refined much by such digestion, by the smoothness of the levity. Then you can make a connection between the male and the female, so that they create a son of fire, which is such a love for all philosophers. And if you understand me well, here lies our whole philosophy. And here it must be noted, that in the secret of our stone there is high temperature and dryness, and obviously coldness and humidity, wherefore it is necessary to conceal it, and to disclose its secret, because the temperature which is in the hidden is the element, and also the oil, is it any way? For this it fixes on dry ground, because the drought of fire touches it. But that which is in plain sight is cold and humidity. The season therefore ought to have a ratio between these, that cold and humidity are tempered to heat and dryness, so that they do not escape from fire. Make, therefore, that humidity and coldness receive the heat and dryness which were in secret, so that they may be one substance. That coldness and humidity is an aqueous and burnt smoke, which corrupts and produces blackness, and that stone is of another virtue and nature in secret, and of another in plain. Then it is made running like oil, which is a dye that is alive, multiplicative, consolidative, colorative, declarative, purgative, perpetuative and confirmative. For in what composition are the works of the planets and their images in their respective places and tempo, as in the operative fruit? For in the first month of the fetus, when semen is received into the uterus, Saturn works by its coldness by coagulating and drawing the matter, and thus poor nature is coagulated into the first mass. In the second month Jupiter works by heat to digest the raw mass, which is called the embryo. In the third month Mars works by acting in its third heat and dryness, dividing and mediating that mass and its members, arranging. In the fourth month the Sun works, which nourishes the spirit, and begins to live in childbirth. In the fifth month Mercury works, which produces the sores and vents. In the sixth month Venus works, the Moon operates in the seventh month with its stiffness and humidity, it labors to expel the baby, and if it is then born, it can live, but if it is not born, it becomes weak. And again, in the eighth month, Saturn, by tightening the works, would be a fetus in the womb, and if he was then born, he would not be able to live. But in the 9th month Jupiter again, nourished by heat and humidity, reduces the powers of the fetus, and is thus born completely and lives well. Therefore, it should be noted that for 3 months water preserves the fetus in the womb. The air also fuels for 3 months, and the fire guards the same number. When these are completed, the blood of the one who is detached from the navel, when it is cut off, goes out to the breasts, and there it takes on the whiteness of snow. Therefore, it will never be open to a baby until you have come out with a breath of air to drain it. Then when it is gone, the mouth is opened and the mouth is sucked. From these tribes we must understand, and with a sharp wit know how to combine and extract 2, for from 2, 3 are not drawn out, but rightly converse. And so, all who want to know this will sharpen their wits to acquire a treasured treasure from 3 words in which there is hidden stone, in which is hidden temperature and stubbornness, dye and depth of dyes, and hot oil and a combination of humidity. It should be recognized that there are 4 main forms of our stone, namely, to loosen, cleanse, unite and fix. To loosen is to divide bodies and to make matter. To cleanse is to disperse, to drip down, to ascend and to descend. To connect is to become pregnant, to whiten and to make red. To fix is to leaven and to betroth. The solution turns the stone into its primary material, that is, its water, washing into air, coupling into fire, fixing and tinging into spiritual earth. Whence Aristotle, when you have water from air, and air from fire, and fire from earth, then you will have full art. Because there are 4 elements, then it is well and perfectly prepared, and the master of the work and fire does all these things in one vessel alone, in 4 degrees, namely, 4 kinds of color conversion, as will be explained below. Fire is dissolved according to Orisenum, so that it is turned into mercury, and is divided into 4 elements, so that it may have the first origin, and so that the sulfur of the philosophers is extracted from the body, and that silver is considered clean living above the earth, of that matter, of which gold and silver are made under the earth, 1 part converts 1000 mercury, or anybody made emperor into pure gold or silver, according to the fact that the elixir has been prepared. And this the philosopher Richard, astonished at this, and the son of the king of Persia, says, above all it is wonderful that in 1 vessel and 1 fire there is distillation, sublimation, mortification, calcining, whitening, rubbing, fusion with solutions and freezing. And he wishes to speak of cold and wet, and his friendship was made with fire, and became all running, penetrating, colorative, perpetuative, living oil, persevering, purifying, color living, quickening, causing the dead to rise again. And there is leaven pregnant with himself, conceiving himself, giving birth in himself. All these things must be known to those who are seeking this. And it should be noted that there is no other truth in this science, except these alone, namely, that if pure living silver, pure, coagulated, by the force of sulfur not scorching, that will be the best thing which alchemists can receive, so that their gold will henceforth make them as Aristotle says in the 4th book of Meteorology. And so, we conclude that, which in the end can be made with white sulfur, not with killing, nor with silver, because the best sulfur, which is clear with redness, cannot be compared to gold, unless it was at first white, because citrus is composed of much white and mixed black. And therefore, the philosophers first handed down the composition of white sulfur to silver, and afterwards of red sulfur to gold, because it cannot be made gold, unless it was formerly silver. White sulfur, however, is considered to be of the purest substance of living silver, inasmuch as it contains in it all that we need. Therefore, it is necessary for an artist to be of a constant will, and not to employ more, but only to concentrate on completion. Because our art is not perfected in the multitude of things. But this art, because it is very difficult to know, we intend to give a doctrine of its secrets, and first of mercury and water, of body, spirit, and soul, and of their operations, which are not altogether unknown and hidden among the great men. For the water of mercury is that water which we ought to use in our whole operation. But in his government the whole secret is clear, and therefore, in the beginning you must know the nature of mercury, and in that regime, with which all the work is completed duly prepared. Because mercury heats and cools, dries up and moistens, and does contrary works according to diversity and the manner of his government. Therefore, the whole secret consists in the government of the people. Therefore, the operator of this regime must be well acquainted, without error, since by the same operation he does not operate in the same degree as contrary to himself, the admixture of that water with the water of the sun, with the purified sun, and before freezing it does not work except for only one operation, as if it were cast on top of the copper, but only dyes it, and does not produce another complexion which it had previously, as regards its existence, because by the examination of fire it may be possible to separate the dye from the body, notwithstanding the fact that the dye is fixed, just as the moon is separated from the sun. But in true transmutation of copper, or of any other metal, the true color is required, and the true colorant union with the colored, and the true transformation of all the elements of color. The second will be the fixing of color and the introduction of a new form, to which the proper color follows. Therefore, the principles which Geber gave up cannot be made a true medicine by means of it, nor can it be said by the words of philosophers in the crowd, assembly of the philosophers, as I similarly know. Moreover, the crowd says that medicine should be composed of 4 elements, consider its complexity. Therefore, the crowd does not speak here except of base works, that is, of the foundation. For thus says Geber, where we have spoken the more openly and plainly, there the more we conceal knowledge. Wherefore it should be known according to the authors, that there is just one stone, if any one errs from that one in the beginning, he will be tedious in the end. This one, however, is not one in number, but in genus, just as the male and the female are sufficient to produce offspring without any other addition. And thus the stone of the philosophers composed of 2 things is sufficient for intended medicine, namely, the spirit and the soul, which are the sun and the moon, and some say that a third is added to these 2, namely, the body. For just as man is composed of body, soul, and spirit, so is our stone. In this, however, there are different opinions, for some say that one of them is spirit and body, and deceive men about the addition of the third. Others say that the third is said to be composed of 2, since it is similar to neither of the components, and is called by the name of all bodies. Others say that the body should truly be added to these 2, because the work will be stronger, and their operation will be finished in a short time. But in whatever way opinion is held, the number does not increase. In order to make it clear, it should be noted that Kibrik is the father of mercury and of all liquids, and this is called that one, which is expensive and cheap, but living silver, which is his son, although it is complexly different from him and a stranger, because a metallic body is composed of these 2 objects. It is, therefore, very evident that his composition, which I shall repeat in whatever way, consists of 2 things. And it is known that after which these 2 are joined together, the former always calling by one name. But this one which is called the brass of the philosophers is named after the names of all things of that world. And on this account his errors on the whole, both on account of the multiplicity of names, and also on account of his ignorance of the proper proportion. Likewise, when you hear something about the yeast of the philosophers, you understand nothing else than a perfect body, perfectly clean and brandy. And yet no one believes that he can unite the spirit and soul to the body, through contrition alone, or through a simple solution. An example of live silver, combined with lead, seems to have been mixed with it, but it is not in truth, because the violence of fire is severed. But what the philosophers say, loosen and curdled, thus, without a doubt the solution of body and soul in water is understood, and freezing causes the soul and spirit to mingle with the body. Replace it for the sole purpose of payment, and that the simple freezing of the soul and spirit should be perfectly united to the body, had the philosopher not said, loose and freeze again, and loosen and return again to the frozen body, so that the dye of the stone may increase, if they could be joined together in the freezing. Know, therefore, for certain, that the more often it is dissolved and frozen, the more soul and spirit are united to the body, and retained by it, and the dye is multiplied at every turn. And here it should be noted that the greatest secret is that red and white stones, made from other elements, can be combined with the finished elixir, and then they add to its tincture and not otherwise. Another secret also, that the waters may become sharp, with which the body is dissolved with a perfect solution of souls and spirits, and afterwards it is frozen, by God's grace. However, all parts of our stone are concrete and essential. The operation of this stone is considered by the philosophers to be manifold. For some rectify them individually, and compose them, and then persecute them, and this operation is varied in many ways, and is laborious, and difficult, and subtle, therefore many errors in it, but the operation of this stone is one of the lines, and is completed in only one vessel. However, there is no fire in the total activity of the whole. And therefore so that this treatise may be sufficient for your students, and may be advantageous, God's, that you enter into the fire of this work, is like the one of the sun in the greater world. But the sun is moderate in the warmth of spring, and light in the heat, but otherwise the herbs, which are tender, would wither away, and would by no means bear fruit. But this is the heat entering the plants, until they grow by degrees, and the more they grow, so much the more the heat grows up gradually and daily by degrees, until the harvest is brought to an end, and the spring is ended, and because then the sun is stronger, Leo, until all things receive their due form and perfection. And blessed be God by his wisdom ordained these things wonderfully. Therefore this stone must be guided in a similar way. For some say that the heat of the first regime should be like a hen lying down to lay her eggs in order to give birth to chickens. Others say that it should be like natural heat digesting food and nourishing the body there it begins to rise and grow moderately. And for this reason some have said that we are tickled to begin with the sun existing in Aries and the moon abide in Taurus, and although there is only one action of this stone, namely cooking with natural fire, however, the state of this heat varies in 3 ways. Because first the fire will be moderate, and it lasts to black, and even until it is converted to whiteness, which blackness lasts for 46 days, or more, and secondly, the energy of the operator and the direction of fortune, in Taurus. By a certain apparent whiteness, the fire is gradually increased, until the drying or perfecting of the stone, and this heat is likened to the heat of the sun in Taurus, discursive in the twins. When the stone has been dried and covered with dust, the fire is again strengthened, until the stone is most perfectly beat, and is clothed in a royal garment by the fire. And this heat is similar to the heat of the sun in Leo. For this is the dignity of his house. Then it continues until it becomes poison. For then our dragon, shining in the solar fixation, is adorned with the rays of the heavenly and earthly power. Hence the philosopher's stone conquers all things, digests all things, who corrects all vices to the body. The names of this are multiplied according to the number of colors that appear. For in the first regime, since he is black, he is called Earth and Saturn, and not in the least of all black and earthly bodies. Then, when it is whitewashed, it is called living water, and by the names of all the waters and salts, aluminum, and things that have whiteness. But after it is driven, and elevated, and subtle, then it is called air, and citrus oil, and the names of all the spiritual and the birds. And then, when it is red, it is called heaven, red sulfur, gold, garnet, and the names of all those reds that have the beauty of those precious stones, as well as in animals and plants. Here it should be noted that our water is called male, and the earth is called female, which is the thickness of a stone, and thus the earth becomes spiritual and brass and subtle, and this thickness or earth is called our brass and our lead. It is necessary, therefore, to govern it sweetly, so that the sulfur may be increased, along with the water in which it is. For water dissolves and whitens it. But some say that one of these, namely, the dregs remaining in the bottom, which is called smoke, is earth, and the other which ascends from the earth, namely, from the dregs, is heaven. Therefore the heaven above the earth must be repeated so often, until the earth become celestial and spiritual, and the heaven become earthly, and be joined with the earth, then the work is completed. And it should be known that, since the body is coarse and the spirit subtle, it cannot be mingled universally, unless at first the body is so fine by the spirit, so that the body itself is equivalent to that spirit in subtlety, and then there is such a mixture as fire does not separate or surpass. If he continued to act upon it for 1,000 years they can be separated. For thus shall the dragon die, and not without him, that is, unless he be slain with him. And this dragon, that is, sulfur, is extracted from the body by the teacher, and is our secret sulfur. Therefore, when you decide to try the medicine, you put the weight of 1 grain of wheat on a plate of red-hot copper, and if you go in with a little heat, the plate will be completely dipping inside and out, and the stone is perfect. And so, it is clear that there are 3 things that will complement our elixir that we have made. The first one connects the 2 to the medicine. And so, there are 3 joined to one body. But it is to be noted that if the medicine is again dissolved and ruled in all respects, then there will be no end to the dye, and the moon will tighten the pores, making it bulky, and will cause foam and stink in the other bodies into gold or silver, and through our art there is a true alteration of one nature into another. But it should be noted here that there is no alteration of minerals to achieve a higher level of minerals. We speak not of angels, nor of intelligences, but of the higher degree of perfection of all metals, and that is in the mineral spirit, for this spirit is mine. But the gold does not differ from the gold except in the fact that it is fixed, and the spirit is not fixed. Thus, our gold is not the gold of the common people, since ours is spiritual, because it dissolves all imperfect bodies by separating the pure from the impure, because nature receives nothing but what is of her own nature, and therefore, it dissolves all bodies, separates, purifies, and brightens, dyes, and transforms them into excellent gold, because thus it is a fixed body, made spiritual, and according to a different mode of digestion. For at first there was silver before there was gold, therefore, gold was inextricably digested, etc. The first step begins with the ladder of the wise men. Of the manner of the newborn born. Bacon says in the Mirror of Alchemy, no one is born except from man and woman, therefore, it is nothing of work except from the fact that it is truly lucid, as from the purest sun, which is illuminating all things in its own light, which illuminates the air and heats it, generates and nourishes its heat, plants and stones, and casts out the darkness of that mercury other imperfect bodies, when he will be cast upon it, as Geber says of the essence and creation of the sun. Because sulfur is irradiating and shining in its brightest and most pure substance, it illuminates and irradiates not only in the day, but also in the darkness at night. All these things indeed are from her work, when she is clothed with her own garments. Therefore, whoever seeks him may make peace between him and his wife, so that they are not separated from each other, but are united inseparably. And this will take place when you have pulled him out, partly from his nature, and likewise with his wife, partly from his own nature, and are slain in this deed, so that after they have been slain, as will be more fully apparent, they will be raised up by a new incorruptible resurrection, for after their resurrection they will be clothed in glory and everlasting fortitude, and then all who know their secret will rejoice in great prosperity. A greater nature is created out of them, which are sulfur, magnesium, seeded, living silver, and likewise the spirit of sulfur, and it is only the hidden spirit of this knowledge. Magnesia is earth, sedua is air, silver is also living water and a flowing body. The spirit also is the second water, of which all the above are nourished, every plant is invigorated, every light is kindled, therefore he also produces all the fruits. Therefore, truly attach these natures, namely, male and female, hot, cold, wet and fig trees, and nourish them with living water, and the spirit and the light of it are dyed. Cook the work, make it out of which body it is. For among the philosophers, it is called the water of wisdom, by which the wise man of art unites it, so that nature is altered and converted into another nature, and nature appears by nature. Therefore, combine the two natures, until you look at the natures, draw, and become the brightest and clearest thing, which shines and is illuminated, after it has been adapted to its great and most excellent perfection. No one can attain to such and such a perfection unless the ladder of the wise, which is made up of 12 steps, is first to be ascended. The first step is calcination, which is the main purification of our Benedict's tune, heat restoration, innate moisture preservation, and solution induction. And every calcined thing is fixed in its own kind. And so the sun and the moon are stimulated philosophically with the first water, so that the bodies may be opened, and they become spongy and subtle, so that fertile water can better enter to work its work, which is to raise the earth to a wonderful salt, by its very attractive power alone, which second water is fire not natural, by virtue of which he becomes the fulfillment of this mastery. And hence, speaking of fire, Ramon, he says, it must be noted that here the contrary operations lie, because just as fire against nature dissolves the spirit of the body fixed into the water of a cloud, and the body of a flying spirit constricts to the ground frozen, he dissolves the fixed thing by fire contrary to nature, not into the water of the cloud, but into the water of the philosophers, because the fixed fire of nature returns volatile, and the spiritual body into the spirit, and becomes dry, and ponderous becomes light. And the spirit moist, according to the form of the water twice and constrictive weight. Unnatural fire is the fire of a bath, whether it is for holiday, or vintage, or for horses, or anything else that arises from excessive energy. It is the elemental fire, which is nourished by bile burnings, and nourishes the flame. Having learned the mysteries of these fires and the true principles of our medicine, we can easily reach our mastery. Wherefore, if it is required, from which our medicine is made, I say that it is elicited from them by the art in which it dwells, potentially by nature. And according to Orisenum, from those in whom perfection or proximity to the first matter is found, our medicine is developed. We are not talking about extraneous imperfections, because he can perfect the imperfect noun, nor make clean the unclean. And because it is fitting to draw natures from the root, Aristotle says, let the craftsman of alchemy be aware that the species of metals cannot be changed unless they first be brought back into primary matter and form, which are the primary parts of essentiality, and in all bodies, there is a science. They are not, however, raw in every way necessary for our work, but it is also the stone of the philosophers, and that is not the limit on the extremes. The upper extremity is complete elixirs, by which art works on the earth by means of nature. And there is no passage from one end to the other, except through the means by which neutrality is required, so that the body is reduced to its certainty through art, which imitates nature as far as it can, but in some cases, it is weaker, and in some it corrects nature. We must therefore know that the intention of our change is to begin where nature has defined it, because the origin of the work of all human beings extends divisively to the interior watery nature of all three extremes, namely, to the depth of the perfect body, or the depth of the richness of the perfect, the dead, and by killing the living, whose giving is deadly. Whence the philosopher says, every whole is composed of three parts, by which it can be concerned with the work of nature. First, to draw out, collect, purify, and unite nature in proportion to the appearance of watery things, and also to freeze them, which is entirely unknown to the human memory. But as to the artificial operation above, we strive to work spiritually from the contrary sense, yet by imitating nature, namely, by killing the living, and by resuscitating the dead spiritually, and by arranging the more perfect outwardly. Wherefore, if the quantity of water be equal to the quantity of sulfur, and gradually greater, namely, the amount sufficient to incorporate it, gold or silver is generated from them, according to the amount of the decoction. We must know that we will not receive that from which they are bodies themselves, but we will receive that which is of itself, namely, of all of that, and our mercury is not the popular mercury, but it is mercury which kills mercury by its smell. And according to Albert, our mercury is made from perfect and non-imperfect bodies, that is, with the second water, after it has been duly calcined through the first water. Out of which is then formed alkali water, which has been curdled with silver, because our ashes are closed and our brightness burnt. The second step is the wise solution, which is a hidden revelation, a thinning of the thickness, and a reduction of a hard, dry earth into a certain liquid substance. Whence the philosopher, until all things become water, work nothing. And that water is the mercury of the philosophers, by which we ought not to use another, which, however, is not done, until the sum of the flying parts exceeds the fixed sum. This water, according to Hermes, the father of the philosophers, is said to be one and only one, and magnesia, containing in itself spirit, soul, and body of ashes, is unequaled by that name, because nothing like it, of which it is agreed that the hidden majesty of nature may manifest, the philosophers call it heavenly water, and there are resistances in this water together. Convert the matter into a thing, and you will have the device. And in this solution, while the earth will be troubled, the mountains will be transferred into the heart of the sea, and then the form is destroyed, but when one has been destroyed, another is immediately introduced, for every quality coming with such, makes it such as it was not before, because it does not give a natural quality, in itself the qualities of act or potency. Therefore, Orsenna says, the latter quality derives the entity from the quality which is the former. The solution of a stone is to bring it back into the mineral water from which it was composed, working in nature, and the stone does not bear fruit until it comes to nothing, like running water. From which, therefore, it is agreed that the reduction itself should be made by loosening, it is lighter and more competent to neutrality, and afterwards to its first aqueous nature, or in some other way to some other subtlety. And what can be done through fewer things is done in vain by more. Wherefore the philosopher says, if you will be able to perform from mercury alone, you will be the most precious work in the Degator. And you may know that there is no outsider in which it has to be converted by natural mastery, as is clear by frozen ice, which, when it is dissolved, is turned into water. Wherefore he says, unless anything be turned into water, it will by no means be attained to perfection. Whence Hermes, let not nature be tampered with except in its own nature, the improvement of whose nature is effected by the genius of art, and art in incense does not correct what nature cannot do. Therefore we must help nature, through art, which has been omitted by nature. For what nature has in 1,000 years to complete is so much lower, that we, by the supreme industry of art, have a less time limit than the year alone, for Aristotle says, unless I saw gold and silver, I would have said with certainty that alchemy would not be true, unless I saw theoretically the perfection of the work of nature, and would not regard alchemy as true. It should be recognized that there are several kinds of solutions, yet we only need one solution for each, which only has to be done, as I have said, of himself with himself, etc. raw, clear, without violence. Whence the philosopher, raw solution is better than cooked, dew than dry, voluntary as violent, tempered as haste, lashes as smelly, bright as thick, black as red. Therefore, in every solution we must take intimate care of the glazing of the material, along with the smells and tastes of imperfect bodies, and also lest the reproductive power of that form should be stifled in some form with corrosive caustics. Therefore, help the solution through the moon and the coagulation by the sun. The digestion of this solution is very necessary for us. And it is called our digestion, the ratification of moisture, the destructive ripening, the relaxation of the interconnectedness, the arousal of disposition, and the aptitude of separation. But, as Avicenna says, to loosen the body and to freeze the spirit is our first work, because the body is not detached unless the spirit freezes. Nor does the spirit freeze except with the dissolution of the body. For if they are united together, each acts toward the other, just as water acts upon the earth mixed with one another, therefore you will subtly it in its own way. For the earth will not be finer unless it is thickened by which, nor is the water thickened unless the earth is made more subtle. For thus there is no difference of time between the freezing of the spirit and the dissolution of the body, nor a different work, because each of them acts on the other in its own way. For action does not return, and passion to contrary things, in species and like things, in general and nature, and exceeds one of the opposites, destroys or alters the rest of the body, mixed with humidity, when cold and dry, it closes, retains, and oints moisture, making it dry, and yet the humidity cannot escape from the body unless it imbibes itself with fire. For when the putrefaction acts under the proper heat, the moisture is turned into a dry one. And therefore, when the body will be dissolved, you will try to keep it moist, and this with delay. The ladder of the wise is the third step. The above four inconsistencies are distinct from each other, then rectify by distillation. In this third degree they are separated from the ladder of the wise, and therefore this degree is called our separation. What is the separation of the watery scum from the lees, cleansing, smoothness and rarity, the extraction of the parts, the division of the grains together, the production of the principles, and the separation of kinetics? Whence the Psalms, he brought water out of the rock, and oil out of the hardest stone, because it ought to be done in the proper baths, afterward in dry cloths, according to the requirements of reason. From which their phlegm is then separated and emptied first in the baths. Then these four principles are separated according to the standards required from the beginning, and especially the moon, first male then female, and thus their mother was left in the bottom at the first distillation. Of course you will save citrus sapphire, orpiment afterwards taken from the liquid, how often it is separately refreshed by itself in dry tow, until no southern redness ascends, and the orpiment remains clear and white, which is completed in the third or fourth time. The signs of this perfection are weed, whiteness, and purity without lees, except perhaps white ones. The coldness of the soul is created by the abundance of this weed. For Habakkuk says, "There is a black fire left at the bottom of the vessel, which, while it is black, corrupts. Therefore, it is calcined so that it glows, and leaves its oil completely, so that he should be deprived of all fatness, lest he should be hindered from the work of drinking. So that it may become dry and fiery, which before was coldly moist, as the earth." Whence the elder says, "Our earth is taken from two natures, and likewise water from two bodies, and thus the subtle is separated from the gross. For he is not ignorant to draw many out of one, he also does not know how to compose one out of several, and then the union of lust will be completed. For this reason, the soul of that soul enters with life and spirit through the attraction of that air, by the repetition of a distillation, of which the repetition is fiery, the second, it is of a stronger heat than fire. For this is the preparation which many know not, for the philosophers concealed the preparation of the stone, which is the key of art and of the most intricate things. Prepare, therefore, by preparing, clearing, rectifying, seeking for mastery. Divide therefore the stone into two principal parts, namely, the upper part of the ascending tooth, and the spiritual, and the airy, and the lower road, and the earth, it is the stone of the philosophers of generation. For the lower part of the earth is the nurse and leaven, the whole stone piercing, and the upper part is the soul giving the whole stone. To make this division in the philosophical oven specified below, the required heat and the nutritive heat, and continuous, that is, by the 10th and fortnight, and the longer the digestion, the better the digestion of the water from which our brass springs from. And all brass is sulfur, but not all sulfur is brass, because the sulfur of nature is contained in sulfur. And all gold is brass, but not all gold, just as every man is animal, but not every animal is man, as Plato says, it is not good with what follows. For this water is the key to our art, and the head of the work, and our spirit and soul and body make up ours. And they are called at other times uterine brothers, because they proceed from the same womb. And when you have water from air, and air from fire, and fire from earth, then a complete separation takes place. For you have fire from the earth in rarefaction, calcining, and liquefaction, and the earth has been produced from fire and freezing and condensation, and towards the center of the fire. Those who have been put together in heaven, pampered, and who dwell upon the tops of our mountains, for a short time, that air has become a generation, by turning all things in their nature, whose light things yield to heavy things, the light which they had previously conquered with them, they descend to the earth to be multiplied to infinity. Whence the philosopher Caesar says, the vein of the first culprit drops to the top of the mountain. The mover breaks the ground, he pays by adding the second one. The third shines, but when the dreadful moon is at rest, the fourth is born under the unclean frost when frozen. The fiery force of the fifth general arises in you. The sixth is found in the veins of sea water. The seventh is found dipped in earthy sands, the AUA does not know how to afford sweet things, and the clod gives the veins full of citrines. The first black earth forms the 10th sand, 12 of the fishes in the veins shine brightly in clear weather, so that you come, or it drips twice from the sand, but the vein of the fountain coming from the top of the mountain. The fourth step is the ladder of our wisdom, and it is called conjunction. Therefore, when separated, as it is prefixed, the four things that are dead and rectified, we unite and connect those four things, and our union is said. Fusion qualities include coupling, dispersed replication, equalization of principles, and resistance patterns. For the Rosary says, order the airy substance by discernment, so that the earth may be so composed of two natures, and water, as it is said before, from two bodies, because thus the subtle is separated from the coarse, and the rare from the thick, genius, that is, with the proper warmth and nutritive value. For water is not necessary for our work, but white, nor oil, but white luminous citrine, nor earth, but pale and greyish white, and there are two earths and two waters in our work. The first earth, which remains in the bottom at the first distillation, is properly pale, upon which our rectification is made, and having been separated from the oil by that earth, as above, it is but confusedly hinted at, and similarly from water. Again, the oil is distilled of itself, and then what remains in the bottom is called fire, which is sometimes called the second earth. Of these two countries Aristotle is speaking, as, for instance, of earth and fire, which are calcined together in white, after which are two waters, namely, water and oil. And sometimes he takes the name of one instead of the name of another, so that unworthy investigators may escape from the path of truth. Again, Aristotle says, add to it two operating virtues, namely water and oil, by rectifying water and air, earth and fire will be rectified. I added this for that reason, because I said less about separation in the preceding chapter. And for the sake of those who are wont to collect books, lest at the same time he find what they require in a single chapter, placed entirely in order. But in what I say to the conjunction, that there are three ways of conjoining, namely, the diptative, as between the agent and the patient, rare and dense, male and female, sulfur and mercury, matter and form. Whence the philosopher, and matter and form are only then contained in the generation of nature. Again, he says elsewhere, it is enough for the operators of this art to reduce the matter to the simple purity of rarity and density, although not individually in the elements. Then join together Sabricus Bayer, so that they may produce a likeness among themselves, whose seed will be multiplied like stars. And thus, it is clear that the diptative conjunction is sufficient for teaching. The triptative union, that is, the union of the Trinity, is made from body, spirit, and soul. For according to the philosophers, just as the soul is the bond of the spirit, so also the body is the bond of the soul, because what the spirit penetrates, fixes the body, the soul joins. Thus, this Trinity is in effect unity, because the co-eternal are together and co-equal. The tetraptative conjunction is called the correction of the principles, so that one of them is committed in another. Therefore, it is necessary for the most praiseworthy conjunction, as if in our work we cut the four elements into liquid, fresh, tepid, and properly proportioned. Because quality does not arise from three, but from four contradictions in things communicated in nature. And just as the woman has 15 veins, and the man 5, so the sun in conjunction will first have 3 parts of her water, and her wife 9, the tail of which a boy, when he ascends, will hold his beak upon it, and in the required philosophical vase, and placed in the philosophical oven, and subtly closed up, he must stand on the aforesaid humour. And it should be known that the seed is never but at the same time placed in the matrix, and the matrix is closed in the envelope until it is produced into light. And when it has stood still in an eclipse, for 5 months, when the darkness recedes, and the bright light advent, the heat is increased temperately, and so especially during the days of abstinence, until the shining sun rises, because he then does not fear the punishment of the contested fire. And so is the body a reason for retaining water, and the water to save oil from combustion, and the oil for the purpose of retaining the tincture of fire, the cause of the appearance of the color, and then he applauds the like for his like, mainly because of the desire for the adhesion of the material and the sulfuric form. Whence the philosopher vomiters. 2 sulfurs dwell in the body, like fire in wood and stones, which must be extracted by a very fine art without burning. For he who does not differ between 2 sulfur and sulfur knows nothing, yet the work begins and ends with one odor. There is, however, a twofold mode of composition, one moist, the other dry, and one made by cooking. So neutral releases the rest, because it makes the pressure moist and releases easily. When they have at the same time warmed themselves to the wet and dry, they will obtain an easy impression from the wet, and the moisture from the dry, so as to retain all the impression firmly, while sustaining the fire. Hence, on account of its fluidity and its changing flow to perfection. Therefore, not by dipping until the sun and moon, and spirit, and soul, are converted into one body, that is, to the earth. An example of this is the potter's work, whose confidence consists in 2 things, namely dry and wet, dry so that it converts moist, moist so that it loosens dry, for to loosen and join together are the principal things of this art, and the beginnings of the work, and just one thumb. For he who does not loose and curdle, errs in many ways. The 5th step is our ladder, and it is called putrefaction, which is celebrated 46 nights in the shadow of purgatory. And putrefaction is necessary, because it is a correction and an aptitude for regeneration. Hence Arist. From the prayer of the heavens happy and unhappiness spring forth on earth. Therefore at the beginning of birth it is necessary, as we have said, to prepare the elements, right and highest, and equal, to mix above the light fire, and beware of the intention of the fire, until the elements may be joined together, and attain to one another, and will embrace each other by such a conjunction, which will be thus brought on by degrees, and at length will thus dry up by a light fire, and their conception is done its hot till 16, it will last a day, before it is covered with blackness. All of this must be carried out with the cooking and burial, but when the fire is lit, mercury will rise higher, on account of its spiritual nature, to ascend to the air. Therefore, it is necessary to govern the virtues gently until their humidity is dried up by fire. For it is firmly frozen by the solar heat, and then by degrees the energy of the fire, so that it can be faked. Whence the Moreans. Be assured that nothing is born or growing, nor animated except after rottenness, because if it were not rotten, the stone could not be shed nor dissolved. And that for this reason, because when he dies through corruption, the composite corporeal arises through regeneration, the simple spiritual one. Whence the Saviour says, unless a grain of corn falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces many fruits, and unless the humidity of the uterus is conjoined, and the heat is continuous, the sperm will not remain, nor bring forth a newborn. Hence 4 degrees of heat are to be observed. The first is slow and lukewarm, like a carnal or an embryo. The second is the average temperature as the sun rises in June. The third is great and for the fire of calcining. The fourth is hot and violent, as it were of a burning building, each of which will double the other. Hermes says, let the stones be taken at the beginning of the recent work, and be mixed evenly into the ground, and until they are espoused and some are accumulated in the other 46 nights, so that the conception may take place at the bottom of the vessel. But this concept takes place in putrefaction by the force of heat, until they are decomposed, they die, and are blackened, so that the liquid pitch, putrefying by the heat of the act, turns the moisture into dry matter. But continuous fire with an equally high temperature completes the entire business. But if the heat has become stronger, too much moisture is consumed, and the earth will fall into decayed and red dust, for John says, earth is the mother of the elements, and all things come out of it, and return to it, and in it they rest, and all things mix together, therefore the body must be fixed, calcined, when he ought to fix the runaway. Corruption is the putrefaction of things, from the retention of vapor and the action of moderate heat. Whence the heat connecting the liquid generates first the blackness, and therefore, the sun was darkened at its rising, it remains to remain for 5 months, and, under moderate heat, is distinctly ruled northward in the springtime, like an infant of its mother before animation, and is the middle of the first work. And as we find in Noah's history, the waters conquered the earth and ruled in their 156 days, in the hiding of this blackness before the true whiteness all the colors of the world will be made manifest according to the requirements of nature, because the letters of the barbarian, described in the chamber of the wise man, and the colors of the middle are called. Whence the wise man says, among the successes of wisdom in 156 days one is fertile, one is carried out in the end. And thus, it is certain of those who go to the world of purgatory, before being examined in full, to pass over to the earthly paradise, where there is life with glory, which is the first whitewashing, whose blackness is, which does not open the door of the escaping, because it is formal air, released from the action of sulphurous heat, and drawn out of another body, in the same place it receives life from its moisture, as man acquires from air and earth, like the iron magnet. Accordingly, water receives water from the law, as its own nature, whose power is spiritual blood without which nothing is made. But it is converted into the body, and the body is turned into it, that is, into the spirit. For from whence there is corruption, and from this there is life and regeneration, because from whence death arose, from which life and rise again, and death shall not have dominion over it. But the departure of the soul from the body along with the spirit, is when the body has been altered, and is dissolved by degrees, and something gradually after something, instead of after another. For it does not go forth, and afterwards enters one time, which parts indeed are of one spirit, but the soul is from that which is not another, it became hot and moist, in the nature of blood, and the air which was before was hot, dry and fiery. And so in like manner when it was hot and humid, understand the same way when converting something cold from damp to hot liquid. In like manner, when they say, water and water, they understand by this one water, which is the spirit from which the waters will labor, understand that this is true. The mode is in those souls and spirits, since it is male and female, and any part that enters upon them, namely, body and spirit, and soul, on account of which they said, bodies, souls, and spirits, which is true, and plain, and not obscure, and on account of the multiplicity of conversions, and of the alterations of states, and of death, and life, and generation, and baths, and bedclothes, and nourishment, is called wisdom, and the seed of the world. Because the stone is different from all the stones of this world, you were in nature and in its perfection and in the maintenance of nourishment and growth, and in its separations, to which none of the natures of preparations is attached, because it is of the seed of the world, having much blessing, so that unlearned men think that wisdom is not mentioned of its stones and roganese, since neither there is neither mortification nor quickening in them, nor betrothal, nor conception, nor generation of offspring, nor nourishment, since they are our preparations, which we know of our animals and stones, which we have seen and stood upon them from their vanities, and their empty preparations. For it is said in the commentary, stand on your head, Joseph takes it. 10. 2 fowls tied up below the tail of which the male of the female shall ascend, he will hold it with his beak, which is the principal slave of light and of the white constellation of the brightest moon at the rising. Yes, also the saying of the psalmist is fulfilled, saying, the rivers are gone in the dry land. The 6th grade is called freeze white, and is naturally fixative. And there is soft freezing, hardening, concealment of moisture, fixing of the spirit, different bundles, of homogeneous or homogeneous reno, and fugitive a fitting adaptation from fire to fire, as one dye presents, and an extraneous nature is perpetuated in the other. And it should be known that the deadening of gross earthly moisture is generated by blackness, nay, dryness proceeds from whitening, just as humidity is blackening by means of heat, since without the nutritive heat it gives motion to the pure, but red rather black than white with fire without heat, yellow with a little black, and much white with air humidity. The citrine is more white than black with the abundance of dried up water of the air, rather than by fire, because from black you will not reach citrus, nor red unless it is white at first, because there is no passage from the first to the third except through the second. And it should be noted that the elements are not united except in white color. When white is made of semiconcum, it does not require great heat, but red by strong fire, so that when the whole thing is digested it is quickly turned into fire, so that it fears no fire. Wherefore we must take care that sometimes from mating up to whiteness consciousness, that the matter may not become cold, nor be incited in any way on account of the imminent danger. For if you observe our precepts, you will prosper from the perfect mixing of the elements, and you will know that our water is oil, and our earth is dry fire, therefore that there is neither air without water, nor fire without, the earth can be treated well. And you may know that blackness is the color of death, and the eradication of moisture, the redness of incorruptibility and complete digestion. Then you know the physical solution, and its inanition and indigo, to foresee the approach of the natures of the union, and that which is hidden in the belly of that blackness. Whence the philosopher says, such a stone is no star, that star is the sun, as the flowers of spring sprung up, from which the change of every color proceeds. This wonderful alteration is not only a manual operation, but also a change of natures, namely, of hot with damp, cold with dry, as is evident in the procreation and regeneration of the infant. After the amount of putrefaction they produce much deadly fruit, because the individual increases the form of his species. And sperm is not generated in the womb, nor is blood in man, unless it is first carefully cooked in the liver until it has an intense redness. For only the heat of the liver feeds on chyle, so the heat of the burning bush makes our white sulfur. For the first digestion of the stomach, in which drought flourishes, whitens everything. The second part of the liver, in which the temperature is in force, redifies all things, because they are created by the complexion of digestion. And it should be known that the born of the wise man is born in the air, on account of which our water becomes the quickening of their earth, and is the soul which is in his body, viz. when it is reduced to the end of the first work. And know that the air stretched between heaven and earth, through which the life of each thing consists, runs over all the four natures of them, in plain and in secret, which are the four elements in the state of rectitude and improvement, and the fire of stone, and in that air is there air and not air. Likewise, the fire which we have shown you is water, and our fire is fire, and not fire, and the spirit thrives by the attraction of the air, and through it is its life, but air is of water, and is not separated from it, thing. Likewise our intermediate stone, which is the soul and the oil of the stone, from which the word of virtue and dies proceeds, and neither enters nor goes out through the fire, but water draws it out by the action of nature, because it is of the faster departure with water, and of the genus of spirit, which is water. Because Hermes says, the secret and life of each thing is water, and that which is begotten has a beginning from the emanation of the water, which, when it goes forth, has been created by a woman, and is called albinium, white. And this is the most important reason, wherefore the philosophers entrusted that he has patience in the domination of the subtle watery of the black, raw earth, on account of the inconsistency of the qualities of his opponents. You may also know that this preparation of conversion, from thing to thing, from state to state, is accomplished, just as the seed of man is converted only in the natural preparation of the matrix from thing to thing, until a perfect man is formed from which it was his root, and from the beginning. Therefore it is not changed from this, nor does it come forth from its roots, from which it has been divided, from one thing to another, that is, if it had blood from the mile from which its nourishment was, and likewise without entering into any other thing over that preservative and nutritive heat, which enters upon it, and is converted from state to state, and it is divided from matter to thing, and becomes a chick flying from the nest, and as that from which it had root and beginning, and in like manner the seeds of all the plants of the earth rot, and is changed by the entrance of corruption upon them, then they bud and grow, as those from which they had root. And on this account the minerals are not nourished so that they come out of their roots, but restores the body to that from which it was, and is not converted to any other thing by which it is necessary to feed only at the conception and drawing of the spirit, which is the outflow of the woman's blood, which is called the menstrual period, because at the time of this putrefaction nothing will appear about the offspring. For the sun then goes to the north side, and the water that goes out of a woman is then well called menstruation, and it is that pure essence which first illuminated that which it received from the sun, which is his life after his death, which also begins to come forth from the very first solution, whose color is green, because of its abundance of cold, the soul, and thus the menstrual flow is called water, with which the composite will be carried out during the first 3 months. But when the fetus begins to be quickened, this menstruation gradually draws into its body, until it is withdrawn from the belly, and this through the course to the umbilicus, and thus it is brought to light. For menstrual blood is not well digested, because of the lack of heat. Which is well digested it is converted into milk, which is called corona. This is why it is clear that the blood is biscuitous. And you may know that our water is fiery spicy monthly water, then 4 parts of liquid lime are released within, 4 of which, when attached to a frozen nature, suddenly become decomposed, it blackens all, which is the second water, of which the rosary is speaking, saying, Our water is to be divided into two parts, one part of which the body is frozen, namely, with its intoxication and freezing, on the other side it rots, and is dissolved as the fiery water mentioned above, is vomited up when sharpened. Therefore, for the first, second and third imbibition, it is to be added in turns to 4.2. Earth 12. Fresh water and always and at every turn, namely 45.b.2. But 7 are placed before 52. Which, together with other B2 sharp waters, have to be added after freezing, the act with which, as before, it is completely blackened, whence aurois, to loosen the body and to freeze the spirit is the first work of nature, as was said above. Note, I wrote as I found by depicting rather than writing. It is the 7th grade and is called chabatio, which is the subtlety of subtle thickening, of whiteness and redness, increase of goodness and quantity, and full stripping of the variety of colors. Whence the philosopher. This is in the body, but because their earth is white, in which their gold is sown, and their soul is gold. And that body is the place of knowledge, the assembling of it, and the abode of the die. Whence they likened that to the beards, that is, to the house of their knowledge, although the white beard is placed instead of the gourd, by which all our work is known. Two things make a thing, namely, the second, the third, and the fourth, unless a man has been born of water and the Holy Spirit, he will not enter the kingdom of life. Wherefore Hercules says, restore, that is, loosen the body of the magnet, which has been made white, and made similar to the leaves of a bush, for that is what flies in the best, and the gold extracted from it is called the gold of the philosophers, and it is the dye which is the soul, for when the water ascends the spirit to the higher air, and this body was white, when it was made white gold, after the blackening, they named it our gold. Whence the elder, mix gold with gold, that is, water and ashes. And Hermes, sow gold in the leafy ground, wherefore the philosophers say that our gold is not the gold of the common people. Some, therefore, on account of the two orders of whiteness, namely, of whitening and of making red. Whence Joseph's exposition of the image, the land of pearls and leaves feeds on me conclusively with two waters, and reserved, on the other hand, I will respond to the four, transiently blackening, and primarily multiplying, with which the white rose is completed in the east during the summer, and the rising sun in the moon increases according to the elder. For of these two earths, that is, the humours, which are traced back to the decay of the material, the moon and the sun, for when the second enters, she will be taken from purgatory into the paradise, which is called the first whiteness, following the said work. Pact, and the second ground leaves. This, however, is the second whiteness of the first natural work. It is already sufficient to have said of the first and second dimension of our Tyrian, and of its three qualities and natures. Now it remains to be said of the third dimension, and our fourth quality and color, which mediates the third ray. It will become red in the autumnal season at noon, and this redness is said to be the first of the second work of the sun, which, however, is the last of the first natural work, and with the triune things of the said waters unite fully in the protected vial, and the third earth of the sun is in turn attached to it, and the second work is completed in the most red, namely, that Tyriacus was denied by the spiritual dimension, like Sinapri. For the second, third, fourth, one is made by turning the square into a round shape. Whereupon Alphidius, dry fire and dry calcining with its moisture, and boil dry until the cinnamon is made. And each work agrees, except that the work is white for winter and red for summer, because the red work needs 3 times more ignition, and the sour food 7 times. And keep in mind that the soul is the bond of the spirit, just as the body is the bond of the soul. For the spirit penetrates the body and fixes it, the soul joins, in which is the blackness and death which had not been taken away, they shall not be perpetual, therefore from the water extract its blackness from the soul, drive death from the body by frequent irrigation, wherefore it is said to boil and cook again, and lest we be weary of this, repeat it several times, rare, namely, by blackening, whitening, and completing redundancy. When you are in work, let perseverance and patience come with eager expectation, whose end is convenience and gladness, far be it from sloth and negligence and devilish haste, whose end is loss and sadness. It is called the 8th degree, and it is sublimation. That is not the lighting in the alembic vessels, but the natation of cloudy materials, or the carrying away of the water. For the ways of sublimation and of our exaltation do not differ in being, except that by this sublimation is meant the stone forming and the perfect union of yeast with it. Then also it is a simple medicine, but not perfect, nor most perfect, until the medicine is renowned through exaltation, and it is erected, as it appears below. And it should be noted that for 4 reasons we make distilled water. First, so that the body becomes a spirit of subtle matter. In the second place, so that mercury incorporates himself with the body and becomes one with him. Thirdly, that the whole thing be made white, and then red and clean, and that the sulfur be reduced, and chiefly so that the innate humidity of the stone is restored, which it was first lost in lime, of the purest, quicksilver adhering to silver, by its nature, and of the easiest liquefaction, of the hidden subtlety, and of the slenderest way of entering water, and firmly upon the battle of fire before the flight of mercury. Then what is applied to it will be of the same complexion as with the one to which it is applied, as if you would add water to it, the whole will be dissolved in water, but if it be into fire, the whole will be fire. And when you have fixed the elixir, you bring back the spirit upon the equipment itself, which is mixed and melted by the secret of nature in the vessel of philosophy. For when they shall stand for the duration of the time, he will prevail for the greater part of them, by converting the whole into a spirit similar to himself, then unite it, so that it may generate something similar to it, and do not unite it to it with any other, so that it may be converted, except with the one of whom it was in the beginning. For the spirit converting sulfur into a spirit similar to itself, became both, in flight, and the spirits of the air love themselves when they climb up into the air, as Hermes says. The wind carried him in his belly. Because our generation is made to struggle in the air, and being born in the air is born wisely. For he ascended from earth to heaven, and again descended to earth, seeking out a higher and lower force. Whence Arnoldus the philosopher says, our Son must be lifted up from the earth to the air on the cross, for so it is necessary for him to suffer, and so to enter into his glory. The ninth step is called refermentation. She is twofold, white and red. The leaven of the sun is the sun and the lights of the moon. There is, however, an animal fermentation in the body, a restoration of flavor, an inhalation of odor, and a supply of beings. And just as substantial bodies and those fixed on fire cannot manifest their qualities, nor do they live of themselves, nor are they raised except by the benefit of spirituality. Thus neither can spiritual accidents show their permanent virtues, unless they are first united and perpetuated with fixed bodies, and then the body is entangled in the spirit, teaching, by vigorous means, to fight against the fire. And the spirit teaches the body to penetrate actively gross, fine, dense, to undo the imperfections, and to complete it. Moreover, Avicenna says, that the body and the ferment which you mix there must be a simple and subtle powder. You will not make the mixture at all until both of them are dissolved in water, because in that species there is only a minimal mixture, because it is easier to separate the wine from the earth than from the water. But when water is mixed with water, it receives water as its own nature, which they are never separated from each other, because nature rejoices by nature, and nature desires, has ceased, conceives, embraces, nourishes, renews, guides, strengthens, whitens, and blushes. Now to prepare the fermentation of the Avicenna, and to cleanse it, to kick it and loose it, so that it may be joined with subtle work or body, namely, white with white, red with red. The yeast, however, does not change the true or beautiful stone to any form, except it gives it its own taste and smell, with the vigor of being changed from other bodies to its nature. For when nature is turned around, there becomes one and each one, of which the essence originally comprises. Therefore, they propose a solution, and give a definition to this solution, and so, the fourth part of our brass is leaven. And it should be known that in any dye there is more to the thousandth part dipping in a liquid substance than in dry, as is clear in saffron when it is put into a liquid. And so, he brings back the savage thing attached to its nature, color, and taste in every way, namely, from potency to act. For it whitens, increases, or strengthens spirituality, annihilates burning, contains tincture that it may not escape, and raises the body, and it causes one another to enter and be joined together, which is the end of the work, without which the elixir is not performed, as the pasta is not fermented without yeast, which is called yeast fermentation and coagulant rennet. And it should be known that every dissolution takes place according to agreement, for whatever dissolves the moon, also dissolves the sun, because the body is very hot, and it cannot penetrate it except the most subtle spirit, which is also called air. And all these things are called second spirits, whence there is a homogeneity between two bodies, as it were between God and man, because, when the higher spirit has been terminated, he receives the second. And this is the spirit composing of the two humours, and their spirit is leaven. Wherefore it is clear that by means of living silver does not coagulate the slow white fire, and does not unite it to pure silver, it requires no one for whiteness, and so on from pure gold to red, for it will not be good for him, nor for himself, nor for the world. But the operation of both is one and the same, except that the work is white in winter, as I have said, and red in summer, about the time of summer and of the waves, a flood of waters destroys the third master. The sun does not tinge, as I have said before, unless it is dipped, nor does it even tinge until it is completely dissolved. It is dissolved in full if dissolved in distilled water into the 4th degree. Thus, it is clear that neither the sun nor the moon will go out without leaven. For according to Plato, unless it is in him that he will correct him, it will not be what you seek. Therefore, we order the stone to unite with its body so that it may generate something similar to it, that is, with pure silver or gold, which are the leavens of our final elixirs. And it should be known that ashes are leavened with gold, and gold is their water, and their water is savage bodies, and their bodies are earth cores. And the leaven of this water is divine ashes, which is the leaven of the leaven. Mix gold with gold, that is, water with water. Also, attach the spirit with its whitened earth and lime, which is its own yeast, grind and finish it all with its water until it is fermented, and it will be made like fermented pasta. For leaven of pasture is nothing else than a burden of its own nature. And thus the leaven of the powder is nothing else than gold and silver, without which the elixir is not performed completely, because you have made up of tindurants and spirits. And so what the philosopher says, honor your king with the royal tetragrammaton with fire. The 10th degree is called exaltation, which is the ingenious nobility of our whitewashed magnet, which is mainly through spirit augmentation, earth sublimation, melting pronatation, re-exalted elements, and quickening by making a 5th essence from them. Whence Aristotle, when you had water from air, air from fire, and fire from earth, etc. But this stone in the elements is called final operation, not manual work. First it loses the water which it has from the air after its dissolution into it, for air and water are contiguous elements and intermediates. When the hot overpowers the cold, the air is turned into water, but when the hot overcomes the cold, water is turned into air, having air from the fire, through its dissolution, putrefaction and a large heap on it, until the album is well washed with sublimation. For instance, says Mark Hose, when he drinks his burning water, he becomes black and remains, as I said before, in the shadow of purgatory during the night. He conceives in the baths, and gives birth in the air, then, reddening, walks over the water and becomes whiter on tops, and becomes white, light, and airy, which was formerly a heavy, dry, and dark fire, whence is the psalm. His spirit will go forth and return into his own land, in that day he will destroy all thoughts, that is, the dominions of the humours. From which time they were then turned to the earth, and went into the rivers dry, because flying fell into a little nest, whence he first went out. But you have fire exalted from the earth by the division of a stone, a distillation of water, and a calcining of the earth, and so you may know that the earth supplies its coldness to the water, water imparts its humidity to the air, and the air shares its warmth with fire. And just as fire lives from the air, and air lives from the nourishment of water, and water from the nourishment of the earth, so our stone lives out of all the elements. And it should be known that the subterranean air, which supports the earth, will not be submerged in the water beneath it, preventing the earth from being moistened by water. Therefore, the air was made of complexion, and dividing it between different things, namely, between earth and water, and the air became the substance of the sun, harmonizing among the opposing party, lest they destroy one another, namely, between water and fire. An example of this is the egg, which is one, containing in itself many things, namely, egg white, clay for matter and form, an eggshell, egg and yolk, for body, spirit, and soul, for the cold subterranean air, which is dividing the earth so that it may not be submerged in water. Then the albumen, white of the egg, for water, and afterwards the upper film for the hot air to be solar concording between the adversities, namely, between the water and the fiery yolk, lest they destroy each other by resistance. They are all but one. The lower and colder air surpasses the earth, namely the denser water and the higher air. Therefore, the higher air of higher, hotter, rarer and more subtle air is lower. And so, in 1:25 are mentioned, viz. 1 quaternity, that is, earth, water, air, fire, and the red sun in the middle. And this chicken is the bird of Hermes. Wherefore of all our ancient philosophers it was called our stone, chiefly also on account of its whiteness and dryness, and its manifest surrounding aqueousness, and the most intense redness which it conceals in its most intense form. For Aristotle says that there is no more right transition between the extremes, except through the middle. And therefore hot is not turned into cold, except through moisture, which is their medium, nor is water even turned into fire, unless it is first turned into air, nor is the earth turned into air, unless it is first turned into water. For fire and water are the opposite elements, or extremes, and air and earth are their means, because just as water is near lower air, so air is higher than fire, and therefore water is opposed to fire as earth is to air, because water and air convene in moist, fire and earth in dry land. The earth is immediately changed into fire, as water into air, but fire and water, air and earth are not rotated except the earth into water, and the air must first be converted into fire. But fire at its height, according to Roger Bacon, is naturally hot and dry in the fourth, which, if you wish to turn it into water, bring back the body to temperature, so that it may be susceptible, bring it back into lime, now to fire, and water should be added, which is cold and moist. In the fourth, however, there is neither hot nor cold temperament, and thus water mixed with fire produces a temperament neither moist nor dry. In the same way also, by means of the relaxing and exaggerating qualities, earth and air are brought out to temperament, and thus in spirit with a mixed body. As I have said before, there is a temperament, not so rare as a spirit, nor am I as a body. Moreover, even when you are in work, you should strive to remember all the signs of nature that appear in every cooking within you, and to investigate the causes of them. For through this the knowledge of this organization will appear to you certain, namely, in which degree of fire must be moderated. But if the work is conducted in administering to the red signal state before the limit of whiteness, it must be concluded that you have erred corruptly, which God forbid. Then remove the redness as a remedy, by imbibing fresh white water, unmixed, and turning it black into full heat, and thus always warm until it continually rots, and becomes black again. Be very careful on account of the danger of this embarrassment. The perfect sign of the first whiteness, that of the whole matter, is the manifestation of a small capillary circle, because around the material on the sides of the vessel was a pale yellow, where a white circle first appeared after the blackness. And don't worry about colors that appear before true whiteness, because they are not true. For it turns black twice, gets stinking twice, turns white twice, and turns red twice. For 4 days it is put together, rotten, it will give a dark black color, lingering for a long time, in the second place black citrus, in the third, a black red, fourthly a bright red, like a dry saffron, in the fifth, finally, the heat of the whiteness will be correct around which you will get no effect. But when a white light appears throughout the whole matter, like a foliated earth, or a bush of leaves, a bum, and the calcine firmly fixed on it. Then, by adding new moisture, lift it up, and fixed again, and repeat again. At length the fire is put to death, as it is said before, and continue to lift up your whiteness to the gold of the charioteer of the sun, so that he may ascend in a chariot. He will return to heaven after Elijah, or into the paradise of glory with a royal diadem marked. And then our tiara becomes a perfect and round stone, because the 4 elements of the stone are in harmony with the quality of the temperature. The 11th step is called multiplication, which is the increase of goodness, the exaltation of color, and the artistic accumulation of infinite quantity. And therefore, our medicine ought to be multiplied indefinitely. This is the reason. For the medicine itself is like fire in wood, and like moss in good spices. Therefore, it is the more you will grow, the more it will be worn underfoot. Therefore, you must leave its part at all times, since you have been enriched thrice by it, just as he who has fire has been enriched by fire. The medicine may be multiplied in 2 ways. First by the solution and the repeated coagulation, and this is its virtual multiplication in goodness. The second is by fermentation, and this is its multiplication in quantity. The sooner you will perform the augmentation by fermentation, because when loosened does not work well, unless they are first fixed in their leaven. Therefore our medicine is more perfectly multiplied by solution and exaltation, and in this way spiritual, and after the first release, exaltation, and coagulation, 1 part in the first projection falls over 100, the second over 1000. And thus, tenfold further, always exalting it until infinity, which is the most precious gift of God. Thus, therefore, it is concluded that fermented and unbound medicine works more abundantly in many things, because only fermentation, because it is more fine-tipped, although by fermentation alone it may be multiplied infinitely, because it brings back the yeast applied to it, to its natural color and taste, in every way. The philosophers, therefore, seeing that he did not flee when he fled, was made fleeing. They therefore repeated this to a similar body, not fleeing, and brought it into that very thing from which they could in the least escape, on account of the close harmony of their nature. Certainly the soul enters into its body faster than if it were sent in another, but if you were trying to send it, you will work in vain, because there is no conjunction of darkness and light. To the body, therefore, like to the bodies from which they were treated, they revived and are prepared, because thus they were made to dip and to die with one dye. You may not think, therefore, that what it dyes and shuns is the true tincture of the philosophers. Because they dye and mold with sulfur, unless they are joined together of their kind by like silver living. Therefore, it is necessary that living silver should be mixed with another white, with another red of its kind, and be shunned with other dyes. Wherefore we order living silver to be mingled with living silver, as it is said before, until there be one pure water. And this should be known, Adarnek, that all the names of things, and their likenesses, are opposed to the ancients for no other reason, unless you also understand, that the beginning of this thing attests to its end. And you may also know that this whole thing is not one but one, which both father and mother have mingled and feed them on, nor can they differ in any way from their mother. Mix things, therefore, so that they may be multiplied by being fixed, put the vessel to the fire, and take it as a keeper, cautioning it not to do anything, and the rule is entirely, in the time of the fire linger near the vessel and consider how the medicine will move from color to color, in less time than in 1 hour of the day until it reaches the finish line of whiteness, for it will quickly melt in fire and freeze in air. Because the smoke, when it is felt by the fire, will penetrate into the body, and the spirit will be broken into dryness, the body is fixed, clear, white, or red, according to which medicine cannibalism and leaven. Then decide the fire, and let the whole thing be cooled off, because one weight falls over 1,000 and 200,000, so that the best of anybody may be converted into gold or silver, according to the quality of the elixiris. The 12th and last of this ladder is called the projection of the wise and the complete work, which leads to the artist's desire for joy. Whence it stands for projection in a few words, it should be noted that what is said before is cast, that is, one weight over 1,000, etc. But it is better to cast them away. Now you release upon the foundations, and the foundations upon my words, and my words above. I will love you, O Lord, and I will love you. Pay attention. An example of this is of saffron, which, if dry, is to be cast out, but slightly tinges, but if loosened, let it be joined with a little liquid, and then dyed that little with much infinity. So then you will make the projection, first multiply 10 into 10, and there will be 100. And 100 in 1,000, and there will be 10,000, infinitely. But the cause of these is altogether the chief, namely, of goodness, necessity, and perfection. Of goodness, so that he may die more abundantly, so that he may perform better, and convert more. Of necessity, that it may be better colored, better be marked out, and enter into something similar to that of perfection, because perfect medicine has to convert mercury into the most perfect gold and silver. The perfect number is a coin, 1,000, 1,000. Therefore you will make the projection from the beginning to the last. For if he were thrown so little above so great into the fire, he would be in danger from him on account of his smallness. But all the foundations of medicine are to be thoroughly polished and dyed thoroughly. Because the more it is refined and dyed, the more it works, etc. The epilogue of the whole, and the summary of all the above mentioned. Take, then, a stone sufficiently known in the capitals, and as the urgency of the work is constant, until he reaches the ultimate purity of subtlety, and at the last he becomes volatile. This is the first step in his administration. From hence let it be fixed with the means of fixing it, until it rests in the roughness of the fire, and so the work of the moon is too white, and the work of the sun too red, because white is needed for winter, and red for summer. It is possible to know until it assumes the reddest color. And in this one goal is the perfection of the second degree of preparation. But also in the third is the completion of and the fixed volatile again, and the fixed and unbound, and the unbound a second time volatile, and the fixed volatile again. So that each of the imperfect bodies converts to infinity the only real and funky. It also has the food to heal every disease above all other medical medicines. For it rejoices in souls, increases virtue, confers health, renews youth, retards old age, etc. As Arnold says, and gold made in this way is drinkable through the accumulation of our fifth effects on it, until it becomes thickened together, with which even the elements of other medicinal properties will be able to circulate the thickness of the oil. And then let it be considered the most accurate drinkable gold, most effective balm of the philosophers, which is the most precious gift of God. His name is to be glorified here and forever. Amen.